All right, looks like we've got everybody in from the waiting room. So it has been a while, but welcome back. This is the City of Bend's Utilities Public Advisory Group meeting for September of 2023. We last met in June for those of you who were able to join the tour, and we're glad to resume our monthly meetings here this September. And we're going to continue, get back into the groove of things this fall. So we'll have another meeting next month. Today's topic, we're really going to focus on stormwater. Thanks to Elizabeth is going to key things up here as our main speaker. And of course, we also have Lori back and Austin in the room, the usual faces from the city team. And I'm Aubrey, supporting the city with facilitation. All right, so I can get my computer to cooperate here. So as mentioned, we are going to focus on the stormwater best management practices that the city is looking at, proposed updates to be able to comply with the stormwater permits. I'm going to start off just with a quick recap. If anybody in the room wants to share some reflections from that tour or from the summary document that we sent out prior to this meeting, love to get a little input there. And then we're going to turn things over to Lori initially for kind of a little bit of background on the stormwater system, some reminders about those permit requirements, and then Elizabeth is going to walk through the integrated stormwater management program. We're going to collect feedback today and have some discussion opportunity, but there will be, just as a heads up, some additional comment opportunity if you'd like to dig into more details after this meeting. So that is our plan today. And this is one of our photos. If anybody wasn't able to make the tour, or you might spot yourself in that image. As I mentioned, just wanted to think back to that June timeframe. It was our first chance to connect in person. It was really nice to do that, and beautiful day. We got a chance to look at the Alpenglow demonstration garden. Thanks to Amy Jo, we heard from the volunteers. We also did our quick walk through 2 residential areas and got to see some different aesthetics in practice, to see some regional stormwater facilities and what those looked like. So I put a couple images up here, a couple quick reminders, but from city team or anybody else in the room, any other, reflections, takeaways from that June tour?
Well, I'm really embarrassed to say that I'm wearing the same outfit today that I wore on that trip.
It happens, right?
It must be my Utilities Public Advisory Group outfit.
It's a uniform. For sure. And for all of those of you who did provide your notes after the fact, we'd had those handouts for people to fill in ideas and thoughts, and city team has rolled forward with those. Dan is going to be back next month and can give an update on how some of the things that he discussed related to the water conservation are moving forward too. But
I want to note, let's see, I'm looking at the date here on the email. Aubrey, you sent out on August 22nd an email to everybody, and one of the attachments was a review of not only this meeting, but all the meetings we've had to date. Aubrey did a great job, I think, summarizing, but we're interested in folks saying if we missed anything. We're using your input in a variety of ways to move forward on updates to how we implement current standards, how we're developing new ones for development, and things like the public education ideas. So really much appreciated, everybody, your input.
And we sent, I guess there's 2 ways. If you do have anything that you like or think could be a little better reflected in that summary document, we can leave that open before we make it final for a few more days here if anybody wants to provide some notes. We also sent out a survey link, which is just simple, but we wanted to check in and see how the timing of these meetings, kind of the frequency, days of the week and so forth are working for folks, how, the tools and technology, if it's nice to have things that you can contribute to outside of the meeting, if we have a good balance during the meetings, just get some general input. If there's something on your mind that we could either continue doing or improve on as far as general UPAG process, let us know or chime in here. I'll give it just a beat and then we can dig into our main topic. All right. So
It's
stormwater.
just ready to go. Stormwater. Woohoo! September, we're back in school, folks. So I'm just going to go through a few slides here and probably folks will remember seeing some of these slides before from our previous meetings, but this is really important as Elizabeth's going to describe this really important regulatory document that we'll have out for public review starting next week. So just a reminder about stormwater in Bend, right? It goes into one of two places. The stormwater runoff either goes to a pipe out to the river, or most of the stormwater in the city actually is injected into the ground. And on the right is kind of a little cartoon of a underground injection facility, or typically they're called dry wells. I wanted to note, typically there's a much greater depth distance from the bottom of the dry wells till our groundwater, because our groundwater in most places is very deep. We have about 7,000 public underground injection facilities in Bend that we're responsible for, and we have permit requirements related to both of these systems. And so I'll go into a little bit of that before Elizabeth gets into the details. Next one, Aubrey. So what's important to remember is the city is so lucky we have not one, but two regulatory stormwater permits from DEQ. So again, they relate to those two different systems. The NPDES MS4 permit which is National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit. Try saying that 5 times fast. That's the permit that regulates or allows us to discharge stormwater to pipes out to the river. So it's regulating it such that we try to keep pollutants out of that system. The other one, the WPCF, Water Pollution Control, F. What does F stand for? Something. What was it?
Facilities.
Facilities. Thank you, Elizabeth. Underground injection control permit. So that's for allowing us to discharge stormwater into the ground and potentially impacting the water quality of groundwater. So 2 different permits, 2 different sections of DEQ, 2 different sections of regulations about all of this. But we in Bend try to combine it together into a single stormwater program where we're doing most practices like design requirements for new development or maintenance practices like street sweeping. We try to do the same thing across the whole city wherever possible. So we put together an integrated plan for both of these, but they both have very specific requirements. The NPDES permit is actually much more explicit. It has like all these control measures that are required, like you have to have a public education program, you have to have a map of your system and do maintenance practices, you have to prevent discharges of unclean water, non-storm water into the system. You have to require erosion control practices. You have to require permanent stormwater management facilities, which, can be the surface facilities like we've seen, like the swales and the, on the field trip, I called them stormwater jails, but facilities like that. And we have to do inspections on our outfalls to the river to see if there's anything going out to the river that shouldn't be during dry weather. And then on the underground facilities side, we also have to keep mapping. We have to do monitoring for that. So we collect stormwater samples at least twice a year from some different sites around the city that drain to dry wells. And we look at those parameters to see if the pollutant levels are of concern. And again, programs to protect, for instance, drinking water wells, and we have some requirements about how and where you can place dry wells when they're in the vicinity of drinking water wells. So those are kind of just overall those two permits, lots of stuff in them that we have to do. We've been talking about a lot of these with you folks. This is just kind of a reminder. Next. And this is just kind of a timeline for a reminder. So not entirely to scale. You'll see there's a bunch of dates in 2023, and then you see 24 and 25 jumping in there at the end. But in April, well, let's see, I'll back up. Actually, prior to this timeline, starting in January of 2022, we had a new MS4 permit, the one that's for the discharges to the river, that is the reason that we have this document to talk to you about today. So we have that new permit with kind of ongoing requirements and a few new things we have to implement over a certain schedule. Also in April of this year, we had to reapply for a new WPCF permit, the one for discharges to the groundwater. And at least DEQ let us, again, have a combined stormwater management plan. So what we're discussing today is about a plan that's due to DEQ in November, and we'll address both systems. So in April, we didn't have to submit a new plan, but we had to submit a permit application. We're still waiting for that new permit. We had hoped we would have it by now. DEQ is still putting together what the language of these new permits should look like. There's a whole bunch of cities that are lined up waiting to get their new permit. We're like, partway down in the line. The city of Gresham will get theirs first, and they applied for it a year ago and they don't have theirs yet. So there's still a lot of discussion going on statewide about what the new permit language should look like. So we're kind of guessing at this point what our program elements should be in regards to discharges to groundwater. Let's see, this included the field trip in June. In July, you may recall, I think we mentioned this, but DEQ inspected the city of Bend for our stormwater program. So Ryan Johnson, who usually attends these meetings but is on vacation today, he brought a couple other staff over from the Portland area, or actually just the west side, some different areas, came over to inspect how we're doing with implementing our program. They spent a whole day. They were mostly focused on construction site activities. So we kind of talked to them in the office and showed them how we collect data and how we enforce on permits and things like that in the office. And then in the afternoon, on a very hot day, we spent the afternoon looking at 3 different active construction sites on the west side of the city. We went out to kind of a large private commercial type site. We went out to a small private commercial site, and then we also visited a city capital water line project site. And we haven't received the results of the inspection yet, but the feeling we got from the staff was that they thought we were doing a decent job on erosion control measures, of making sure those are in place for developments. They noted things like we have new permit requirements that will come into play over the next couple of years, where we're going to have to tighten down even more on erosion control, apply it to smaller sites, and have some more documentation requirements. So I think we'll be hearing some things like that from DEQ, but I think overall they were pretty pleased with how the city implements stormwater programs. So, yay us, hopefully. Let's see, and other things on this that are important to point out. We're in the process right now of doing some things required by our new MS4 permit. So for instance, sending staff out to look at stormwater outfalls to the river and see if during dry weather there's stuff flowing out of them, which really there shouldn't be. And if there is, we have to follow it upstream and see if it's, like natural spring water, or like in one case, we know we have a tiny leak from one of our water reservoirs. And so that's probably okay. Other than making sure it's not a problem for the reservoir. So we're working on those types of things. We're working on making sure our codes don't prevent people from doing green stormwater practices like those vegetated swales and things like that. And the plan that we're going to talk about today, we have an annual report, and this new plan we're going to talk about today are due in November. And then another thing, just to let you folks know, we right now have advertised a request for proposals from consultants for a stormwater master plan update that's on the streets right now. Austin, when is that? When will we have those back?
Those are due to come back next Tuesday on the 12th.
Thanks, Austin. So Austin's the project manager for the stormwater master plan update. In the next slide, I'm going to show you the difference between these two things, but you're going to have the opportunity to be involved in both. So maybe just go ahead. Okay, thank you, Aubrey. So today we're going to talk about this regulatory document called a stormwater management program. It's required by our permits. It's where we tell DEQ the things we're putting into place so that we can be in compliance with the permits. But there's another document called a stormwater master plan, just to be really confusing, because they have similar names. So the stormwater master plan is the city's facilities plan for the entire stormwater system. So it not only is addressing some of these regulatory requirements, but it's looking at what are our infrastructure needs, both for water quality and for like flood control management over the next, 5, 10, 20 years. And it's where we put together what are those needs, what are the dollar values on those, what are the priorities, and then that will lead to a rate study to say, do we have enough money to do the things that we think we need to do, and does that have implications for rates? And we'll want your input on all of these things as we start that. We'll probably have the consultant team on board in December, and then we'll start having regular topics maybe every couple of months to come and talk to you about and get your input about, should we change some policies? How should we select the highest priority projects? Is it more important to address flooding under Franklin and Greenwood, or erosion and flooding up on Aubrey Butte, or kind of smaller, more localized series of major maintenance needs, things like that. So I hope that is understandable, that there's two different things. So we try to call the stormwater management program the SWAMP document, and then the stormwater master plan is just called the master plan. So we'll always try to remind you, though, that there's these two different interrelated items. And I think that's the end of my slides. And now Elizabeth gets to talk to you.
All right. Thanks, Lori, for introducing the topic today. So I just wanted to go back in time a little bit to start out with the permit background to where we are today. So in this timeline, everything you see with a 1 means that was our very first 2007 permit. So we were the first Central Oregon community to get a stormwater permit. And when I'm saying stormwater permit, I'm talking about the MS4 one, so discharges to the river. So we had that in 2007. It was effective from 07 to 012, and then DEQ extended that initial permit all the way until 2021. So kind of during that extension period, the city continued to build and improve the program, even though we really just had that baseline permit that didn't say much in terms of like the details of what we needed to do. The city kind of went ahead and kept developing the program. So then in 2021, at the very end of the year, the second permit was issued. And so that's the permit term that we're in now, and it's from 2022 to 2026. And a lot of the requirements within this second permit were already meeting because the program had been developed over this like 10-year period, kind of on its own through efforts by Wendy and other staff at the city. Okay, next slide. And then this is a timeline of the iSWAMP background. So not talking about the permit, now we're talking about the planning document that says how we're implementing the permits. And as a reminder, this is an integrated plan. So it's both for river water discharges and for groundwater discharges, because DEQ has allowed us to combine that document. So again, we first applied for that 2000 permit back in 2003. So we didn't get the permit till 2007. And when we applied for that permit, we submitted the first ice swamp plan in 2004. And then that plan was revised again in 2006, before the very first permit actually got issued. And then we implemented that plan for a couple years until 2012, resubmitted it again, even though we had the same permit, just to make updates. And then from 2012 to 2021, we've mainly been operating off that same management plan. So now we're back at the second circle here, so second permit, and we're about to submit what's considered the third iteration of our management plan. So that's due this November. And that's for our current permit through 2026. Next slide. Okay, so now we're getting into the plan's layout and categories. So the plan has 8 categories listed here. They pretty closely follow the categories listed in our stormwater permit. So we have public education, involvement, illicit discharges, construction site runoff, and then we have post-construction, so dealing with new development and redevelopment requirements for stormwater. And then number 6 is more related to practices that the city does to operate and how we're preventing pollution in those everyday practices. And then 7 is not a specific category in the permit, but it's kind of listed throughout different sections, but it's planning and retrofit for our stormwater system. And then we added underground injection controls, because that's covering the other permit to groundwater in this plan. And so some of these sections are going to apply to both MS4 permit and UIC permit, and I'll talk about how those are listed throughout the document. All right, so here's kind of a comparison of the document structure. So the previous document from 2012 to today, it used categorization of BMPs that referenced to a large performance standards attachment that said specifically what needed to be done. Included descriptions, measurable goals and schedule, specific task numbers, and responsible parties. And this document was 136 pages with 35 separate BMPs. And then moving to today, the 2023 document, we've done some restructuring of the outlines. So we kind of, with the goal of like condensing and simplifying. So we have a refined introduction and background. We took out a lot of the financing and administration that was in the former one, like took out most of it, kept the most important parts, and then referenced additional materials that are available if people need to go look at them. And then, like I mentioned, we added a planning and retrofit section, which the previous one didn't have. So we went from 35 BMPs to 28. So there were a lot of old BMPs that could be kind of combined because they were closely related. And then we also kind of reorganized the template for each BMP. So now we have these tables on the right that kind of list everything in one spot, as opposed to referencing the performance standards attachment. And so this is just a close-up of the one on the previous slide. So each BMP that you see when you look at the document is going to have a number, and that's related to the category. So for example, education and outreach, all of those are going to have an ED in front, and this is all described through the plan, in the plan. And then we have the name for the BMP, and then here we're saying, okay, we're going to apply these requirements to both the UIC permit and the MS4 permit. So we have that listed for each BMP. And then we're listing the group and department at the city that is responsible for implementing. And then any reference documents that go into further detail of exactly what we're going to do. And permit year is really just for the deadline year. And this one, this BMP is kind of ongoing because it's something that we work on every year, not like a you have to put out like a certain document deadline type of thing. And then we have a short description for each one, measurable goals, and then annual tracking measures, which we would provide updates in through our annual report to DEQ. And we're really working on trying to align that with the template from DEQ so that we're not having to go back and look for additional information each time we submit a report. And then at the bottom, this is new for this year, primary pollutants addressed. This is something that we added in order to reference back to some of the water quality impairments for the river. So which is listed, what's called a 303D list. It's a regulatory requirement to list specific parameters or pollutants that the rivers are not meeting certain standards. And any river that's on this list eventually has to have a total maximum daily load plan developed and by DEQ, but we're not quite there yet for the Deschutes. That'll be in the future. So this section was really just added to kind of keep those pollutants in mind and see which BMPs we have that could relate to those and help kind of mitigate with some of those issues that we see. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit in detail about each of those 8 sections and what is in them. So for public education and outreach, some of the changes from the 2022 permit was that DEQ is asking for more specific target audience and topics to include in outreach, and they have also added minimum targets for information on the public website, things like number and types of stewardship opportunities, and more detailed tracking and reporting. And a lot of this, like I mentioned, the city is already doing because we've developed the program over time kind of independently of any specific permit requirements. So now DEQ is kind of in a way catching up and writing these things into our permit. So because of that, we don't have a lot of major changes to our current practices since we're already meeting a lot of those requirements. We did write a new public education and involvement plan that's going to have some more stewardship opportunities and then some new education activities for schools, businesses, and the general public that we're going to work on over the next few years. And then another big update that we're making is changes to the Stormwater's public website. So we're focusing a lot on organizing all of the pages, consolidating a lot of them, and just making it easier for people to access and use the information we have on the website. And so finally, we're just gonna, for messaging, we're really just gonna continue what we're already doing, which is a lot of social media, TV and radio ads, print notifications, and then attending public events. So our program usually has a table at most public events where we provide information on stormwater and hand out kind of like goodie bags, educational materials, and have kids activities as well. And so then down here at the bottom, we're going to have this key impacts box as we go through every category. So we want you guys to kind of pay attention to this box because we're trying to highlight any impacts to your area of expertise or groups. And if anyone wants to discuss any of these impacts as I'm going through the slides, please just raise your hand or speak up. So for this category, there's not much impacting the groups. It's really just a couple new opportunities to get involved with stormwater. And then we're trying to improve access to online resources. Anyone have questions about this section?
And Elizabeth, I guess just as maybe we kind of said this early on, but following this meeting, we'll do an email that'll give you a chance to link to the full document and more opportunity to provide comment, or if you know of somebody else who might want to provide comment during the period, we'll do a follow-up. But anything that catches your eye or interest, we'd love to be able to discuss it here today.
All right, so we'll move on to the next category in the plan, which is illicit discharge detection and elimination. So some of the changes in the new permit, like Lori mentioned a little bit, we now have to conduct inspections of our outfalls that floated the river every year during dry weather to see if there's any flows coming out of them, kind of investigate and report on that to DEQ. And then in this section, we've also had new requirements for our MS4 map and data inventory, a lot of which, again, we were already meeting, but they have been officially added to the permit by DEQ. And then we have a chronic illicit discharge tracking and mapping requirement. This is really related to any ongoing flows that we find in outfalls and how to kind of track that information and report it to DEQ. And then the new permit also has some more refined and specific enforcement timelines when we're responding to any discharges from outfalls. And so, yeah, some of the key impacts for this are that we've increased kind of
Hey, Elizabeth, could you maybe give an example for the group of where we've kind of the steps we take to follow up on a complaint or something we've seen that represents an illicit discharge? Like how does the city respond to that?
Sure. So for illicit discharges, usually we rely on public complaints when we get a report of a spill or something in a street that's going to a storm drain, so people can either call into the hotline number that we have posted on the website, or they can submit an entry into CityView. It has an option for illicit discharges. And so once we get those complaints, they're routed to staff at the city, who then have to go out and assess the situation, figure out what kind of material spilled, how much, and then if they're able to initiate cleanup and prevent any additional material entering the storm drain. And then sometimes it's a little tricky with illicit discharges because if something happens, the person that caused it isn't always there by the time staff gets out there. So it's hard to identify a responsible party. But if they can be identified, they do have a code case opened in CityView, and the city goes through that process to get the problem resolved. And if needed, it can get escalated to issuing civil penalties. And so really for this requirement, DEQ is just specifying more in detail these enforcement timelines that we have to respond to. And so that's all been updated kind of in our internal procedures and SOPs that we have for staff. Did you want me to add anything else, Lori?
No, I just thought it'd be good for folks to know that, anybody can report, and if you see something, you can go straight to the city's website and have access to being able to, or us, you can just call us.
Yeah. That's also something that we're working on that falls under the website updates. Right now, there's not kind of a separate page for this topic to easily find and report. So we're adding like a whole separate page just related to illicit discharges that people can go to. We're including things like what is a discharge and examples and pictures for people if they're not sure, and the contact number right at the top. So we're working on making it very easy for people to report these kinds of things to us. And then some other requirements that are going to be in our update. They have asked for more staff training by DEQ. So all staff have to be trained within 30 days of being hired now. That wasn't in the old permit. And they've asked for some more coordination with other agencies, kind of like police and fire, how we coordinate with them on spills and that sort of thing. And so key impacts is really the city is going to have a much stricter response and escalating enforcement timeline than was previously required by DEQ. And we're sharing all of that information with them in annual reporting. Okay, so we do have an updated MS4 map that we've been working on. This kind of section falls under Section 3 illicit discharges in our permit. So we've really been working to identify very specifically the city's MS4 system and drainage areas. This is something that wasn't done in the past. Previously, the MS4 was using kind of the natural watershed boundaries, but we've really gone in depth and we've had staff look at how UICs affect our MS4 drainage area. So as a result, the boundary itself has gotten a bit smaller where we're going to say our MS4 actually is, because we're accounting for all of these kind of crazy infrastructure things that Bend has going on, where we have UICs right next to like our stormwater piping to the river and those sort of things. So the plan talks about this a little bit and goes through kind of how we did this analysis process pretty briefly, and kind of what rules we use to make some decisions about where we're going to cut boundaries and those sort of things. So the light blue outline is on the right side is our new MS4 boundary delineation for DEQ to approve. Okay, so now we're in Section 4 construction site runoff controls. So the main changes for this section are that we've reduced, or DEQ has reduced the threshold to 5,000 square feet of land disturbance. So anything that large or more is going to have erosion and sediment control plans, plan review documentation, minimum inspection requirements. In our permit, it's at least once in the permit term for each project. And they've also included complaint-driven inspections and the training requirements. So any staff working on any of these plan review or erosion control inspections have to be trained within 30 days. And so we have added to the program document new BMPs that relate to this threshold target. Right now, the city's doing permitting for anything larger than 1 acre and some other more specific types. They do it by type of development. So anything that gets larger than 4 units and things like that. So we're going to have to revise a lot of our permitting requirements and standards related to this 5,000 square foot threshold. And that's something that we've started talking about internally. And the 2024, forgot to mention in the title here, this is just a reminder that the deadline for this kind of section in our permit is 2024. So we don't have to implement this 5,000 square foot threshold until November 1st, 2024. So we're really going to be focusing on this one throughout this next reporting year. And so it's going to include a lot of developing internal tools and processes to implement checklists, permits, potential new fees, eventual updates to code standards and the Central Oregon Stormwater Manual, COSM, and then just kind of defining city staff's internal roles and responsibilities, because this is going to expand, as you can imagine, our inspection requirements to a lot of new projects that have never been inspected before and never had these kinds of permits checking on them before. And then we're going to continue to do our inspection documentation. We have what's called City View. It's like an online database for all permitting, and that's how we track and enforce erosion control currently. So we're working on seeing how we can kind of revise that system to fit some of these new requirements. And according to DEQ, we have a very good inspection documentation and data tracking system with City View. So they were happy with that. And so really key impacts for this section is going to be, there's going to be more project review required for development projects, new permit requirements and documentation, potentially new fees, and then more enforcement for erosion control and more city oversight on development. And we're going to have more structured implementation and new guidance for both staff and developers coming out.
So as you can all imagine, this one could be a big deal for the development community because just the idea of new permits and applying them to all these individual little lots where it hasn't been applied before is going to be a pretty big deal. So we're trying to figure out some ways to make that more efficient. And you might recall, we've talked a couple of times with you about kind of template approaches or simplified approaches. So one thing we've developed, it's just informational now, but maybe it can turn into a permit, is a template for erosion control for a single family lot. And the idea being that it kind of shows a typical plan view layout of a house and the driveway, and then it shows the typical erosion control measures you'd have to have in place, which include like a gravel driveway entrance and silt fencing and things like that. And that we're thinking could be called the applicant's plan. So they don't have to hire somebody to draw a plan for each individual little lot. So small projects, maybe we can save them some time by doing that and just saying, look, sign this, this is your permit, this is your plan, do these things and you're in compliance. So we're hoping to take that type of approach to even just help with our workload of all of this as well. But if there are any thoughts about how to deal with this or examples from elsewhere, we are, open ears.
Lori, I'm glad you brought it up, and that's the first thing that came to mind. I mean, we've been talking about it through all the monthly meetings here, is the implications to both the developers and the individual residential units. So the homeowner that has to take on these obligations, and I think that nails it. I mean, simplifying your process on the city's side and simplifying what an individual homeowner who really, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of concepts, there's just a lot of stuff that's foreign in this discussion. So anything that can be done to make that process more efficient is really helpful. And then the only other thing that came to mind was, as has been discussed previously, is a lot of early coordination with the builders, the developers, that community, so that there's, and this has been done, the notifications are being sent out, and you just want to be able to say, hey, we've taken every step we can to get the word out as far as we can and early enough to plan for it. Because yeah, you're right. It'll be a big change, and it'll be a big transition period, and that's sounds like you got a good plan for it.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And we've been trying to start kind of just expanding our education and outreach related to construction site runoff control, most recently through the building department. So we had staff make like a very simple erosion and sediment control template that kind of describes the main practices you should do on a project and where to store materials and that sort of thing. Not anything like required, more of just like this is how you prevent erosion, citing some of our code, saying that, this is what you are supposed to do, but really just for those projects that have no formal permit yet, just to kind of give builders, those small lot builders, an idea of kind of, hey, this is runoff control, this is what it's for, kind of ahead of time before these changes really take effect. So that's been useful, and I think staff have said that it has been helping a little bit out in the city. All right, I think we can go to the next one. Okay, so now we're talking about post-construction controls, and this has a year later deadline than the erosion control. So this one's all the way until November 1st, 2025 for implementation. And so this most recent permit changed the threshold for post-construction requirements from 1 acre to 5,000 square feet of created or replaced impervious surface. And this is it's kind of confusing because they use the same number as the erosion control threshold. But this is really just for implementing stormwater controls, like long-term physical controls. And just the caveat that for Bend, we're kind of already in a good position because we require people to maintain their stormwater on site already. A lot of the things that we're going to work on is more related to coming up with alternatives when that water can't physically be kept on site. So like we talked about in other meetings, drainage and density, increased density, especially for housing and Bend, and how we're going to accommodate those locations where it's not even physically possible to maintain stormwater on site anymore. So some of those things are going to be talked about in the ISWMP document and what we're working towards. So continuing to implement our on-site retention requirement that we have now, which is already a great start. Reviewing and updating standards for the region. So we're working on Central Oregon Stormwater Manual updates in the next couple of years, and we've already started reviewing potential changes with the city of Redmond and coordinating with them. And then what I mentioned, development of formal exception and offsite alternatives. So that will be much more applicable to Bend for when we get so dense that we can't physically keep our stormwater on site anymore. And then another requirement in this one is process for private facility inspection and documentation. Right now, the city has O&M agreements for stormwater structures, and those are attached to the deed of the property for newer development. But we're going to have to, per our permit and DEQ, start a process for the city to ensure that those private facilities are being maintained, and then also have staff physically go out and check on them. So that's something we're also working on under this section. And then on top of that, we have to map all of the public and private constructed facilities in our digital inventory for DEQ. And so some of the key impacts from this section, again, there's more city oversight of private stormwater facilities, really increasing our involvement on that side. And then development standards. So we're going to see some changes to the Central Oregon Stormwater Manual, which is called COSM. And then, like Lori mentioned, looking into options for different kinds of developments. So simplified versus design approaches. So kind of small project scale options versus large subdivision standards, and then offsite venues for stormwater management.
And we're going to use the stormwater master planning process to discuss some of these topics. So we'll be talking more about these as we start figuring out how to what these new standards should look like, and what it means in terms of, like, I think there's some real policy questions in regards to, let's say we have a threshold where, okay, you can prove that you can't handle all your stormwater on site, and therefore it can be handled by some facility elsewhere in the right of way or down the street or whatever it is. What does that mean for maintenance? Who maintains it? Who owns and maintains those facilities? And then if the city is taking care of these things, how do we get the funding to do that? Which, could be questions about overall stormwater rates or different types of fees for different locations, which could blow up the heads of all of our utility billing staff. But at any rate, there's a lot that we'll be talking about in this regard.
Yes, and this topic will come up during stormwater master plan discussions with UPAG as well.
Yep.
As part of master planning. Anyone else have questions about this section? Nope. Okay. So this is just a reminder of that simplified versus design approach and what we mean by that. So having different options for various kinds of development projects. So simplified, that would be for smaller projects, maybe duplexes or small commercial, really providing them a streamlined approach with pre-made kind of templates and checklists to use that they're going to be familiar with and staff are going to be familiar with to really, you know, improve the process for development or plan review. And so these would be things only doing really on-site disposal of stormwater. Probably the off-site disposal is going to be for those larger scale subdivision projects. And it would have a short list of measures, kind of easy math, plug and chug type templates for them to use. Would be short and no formal kind of drainage reports. And then the design approach will have general guidelines, again, larger projects similar to Central Oregon Stormwater Manual standards, include dry well sites, and have more formal engineering and technical plans that are required for the city to review and approve, as well as the maintenance agreements that are already being attached to deeds.
And as we have these discussions and talk about these approaches, you know, it was great when we went on our field trip, and in some of our discussions, we've been talking about how there's this interrelationship potentially between our stormwater program and our water conservation program. And so thinking about how maybe some of these simplified approaches for stormwater can relate to a simplified approach for private property, irrigation systems and landscape, and somehow working those together. So I think we'll be looking for those opportunities for synergy with this group as we have the next 2 years to figure these out and have them in place by November 1 of 25.
All right. And this is just, like I mentioned, we are already working on making updates to the Central Oregon Stormwater Manual. As that first step, we're kind of going back through the entire manual with the city of Redmond and identifying areas where both cities think there needs to be some updates and changes. So we have myself, Lori, a bunch of engineers from both cities, development engineers in this process to kind of inform those changes that will be made. All right, so moving on to operations and maintenance. So this, again, this is really a internal city focused category where we're talking about city practices and procedures as they relate to preventing pollution. And so some of the changes for the most recent permit for stormwater is that DEQ has requested an O&M maintenance strategy be developed, have formal inspection and cleaning of our infrastructure every 5 years at a minimum, which was not in the old permit. And then just general control and minimize pollutants in our citywide O&M. So that's anything related to streets and infrastructure, any landscaping, vehicle maintenance or winter operations, de-icing, any kind of material disposal that the city does citywide for any kind of operations. Another thing that's new is requiring a stormwater retrofit strategy. And a lot of this will also be part of the stormwater master planning process. Is going to inform a lot of that strategy requirement as well. They also would like a formal winter operations and maintenance program, which city kind of already has. It's really more about kind of documenting everything and formalizing those procedures for DEQ. And then another requirement is to implement litter control methods. So the city already has a lot of litter control in city-owned areas, but then the other part that doesn't fit as well with us is that the city doesn't actually own any kind of parks. That's really BPRD, and any kind of litter control there would be not the city's responsibility. But we do have other measures that we coordinate with. So I think it's the Bend downtown district. They actually manage litter control downtown, and the city coordinates with them on that. And then again, the training requirement, which DEQ has kind of put throughout the permit requirements to be trained, all staff to be trained within 30 days of being hired. And so for the document updates, we have new BMPs for increased documentation of the things on the left-hand side. So kind of formalizing plans and procedures, targeted dates and goals for getting those things done. The stormwater O&M written plan, kind of saying how we're maintaining our infrastructure and kind of where we're going out, frequencies, what are we looking for. We have that plan written and will be updated as we move forward through the permit term. And then the training materials, we do have staff training through an online platform that we use, and we're able to kind of shoot those out to different appropriate staff depending on the work they do. So we have, you know, training specific to street sweeping that'll go out to all the street staff and that kind of thing. And we're really working on updating those existing training materials for the new relevant information, as well as any kinds of assessments associated with them. So a lot of our trainings have little quizzes that you have to answer, and you have to get a certain amount correct or you don't pass. So really updating all of those details for staff. And being able to make sure that we can track who's been trained, when they were trained, and that they're meeting our 30-day requirement by DEQ. And then aside from those kind of trainings that the city can do internally, we also have certain certifications that staff need. So for example, the erosion control inspection staff have to be CECL trained, which means Certified Erosion and Sediment Control Lead. I think that's like it's a 2-day training, and the certification lasts for about 5 years. So we have to make sure we're tracking those kinds of certifications for staff working on the stormwater program. And then another update we have for this section is updating our IPM policy. IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management policy and plans. And so this has to deal with how the city manages its landscape right-of-way areas and city-owned properties, how we're applying pest management strategies in a way that reduces any kind of potential pollution to the MS4 or to UICs, and really documenting how we run those processes internally.
I think something to add to that, Elizabeth, that might be of interest, like particularly for, say, Wes, is that you also have areas in the right-of-way, right, that are landscaped. And so we would anticipate reaching out to like your organization, probably Bend Parks and Rec and others, about finding ways to coordinate on this topic of integrated pest management.
That's a big one for us, integrated pest management. It extends all the way through our schools, so we're pretty versed on it. So
great.
So yeah, we could come up with something for sure.
Yeah, maybe under the auspices of folks may not know, but we are working on a like a memorandum of understanding between the city and the school district in regards to water conservation, water waste, and being able to help Wes come up with ideas for how to manage their landscapes in a way that meets their needs, but also can reduce water use. Maybe we can just integrate this topic, Wes, when we're talking.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, so the main takeaways for this section are really the city's working to increase its documentation and procedures, as well as a coordination across departments, since training really hits a lot of different groups at the cities that we have related to maintenance. And then updating our internal procedures and the training, like I mentioned. And then part of this is going to involve, as Lori discussed, coordinating with other agencies implementing similar things. So like BPRD for IPM and that kind of stuff. Is there any other questions about this requirement that's in the plan? Oh, okay. So this is section 7, planning and retrofits. And again, this was a newly added section in this document. And it really relates to that one specific requirement we have in the permit to develop a stormwater quality retrofit strategy to address underserved areas with difficult to maintain or lacking stormwater controls. And so part of this, like I mentioned, will have the master plan kind of support a little bit of this retrofit strategy because they go hand in hand. And so we have some BMPs in the plan added for documenting and implementing retrofit strategy requirements, coordinating with the master plan, preparing assessments of our progress and outcomes and submitting those to DEQ, and then conducting any improvements in retrofits or decommissioning of UICs on a risk-based schedule. And so some of the things that the city is already working on is kind of using more improved data to inform our decisions. So the image on the left is just kind of a snapshot of something we've been working on related to service calls for like flooding and other types of infrastructure failures throughout the city, and really using that information to help prioritize some of these retrofit needs that we have over the long term, and prioritizing them. And so does anyone have questions about this section or kind of process that we're working on and how it relates to the master plan? And this is the last section that we have for underground injection controls. A lot of the previous 1 through 7 include UIC permit, as like we're applying these sections as well to UIC areas. And then we just also added this separate section for some of the very specific requirements related to the UIC permit. So like Lori mentioned, we have the current UIC permit we have. We've had it since I think 2011. So it's been administratively extended from April of this year when it expired, and we reapplied, and we are waiting to get that new permit along with other cities in Oregon. And so we've kind of listed what we think are some potential changes under the new permit we will get. It will very likely have additional monitoring requirements, and most likely they will include emerging contaminants such as PFAS, which you may have heard of in the news. That has been added to draft versions. We're not sure if DEQ is going to keep it or not. And then we're going to also probably have additional reporting requirements in the new permit, as well as implementation of DEQ Online. So DEQ Online is Department of Environmental Quality. That's what DEQ is. They have initiated a new database online to track a lot of their programs. And they've already kind of started this online system for UIC tracking. So anytime someone has to open a new UIC or close a UIC, they are supposed to submit those requests through DEQ's online system. And we also had to reapply for our new permit in this system, and as well as submit our annual reports through it. And anyone can have an account, even members of the public, if they want to go in there and look for data on any cities. And so this system, like I said, it's right now for UICs. Eventually, the MS4 data will also be collected through this system. DEQ just hasn't quite gotten there yet for the MS4 permit. And so we're going to continue in our new plan to implement our existing requirements and the pollution prevention BMPs in the UIC areas. And we'll likely have to revise our monitoring plan once we get the new permit, because it will most likely have changes to monitoring requirements, being new parameters like PFAS, as well as potential changes to the action level parameters. So under the UIC permit, when we monitor, if the results come back as exceeding a certain level, there are additional reporting and activities that the city has to take if we exceed those action levels in the permit. So those will likely change and require a change of our monitoring plan. And then another big project that we are going to work on is updating the city's groundwater protectiveness analysis. The previous one was done in 2011, kind of looking at what are the requirements that we should put on UICs to ensure that groundwater is as protected as possible. And DEQ actually uses these protectiveness analysis studies as to inform their own approvals of UICs and cities. So right now, Ben's protectiveness is really just a vertical separation of at least 5 feet from the bottom of the UIC to the top of the groundwater table. And so what we're going to work on in this protectiveness analysis update is getting both a revised vertical analysis as well as a horizontal analysis, especially for these new and emerging pollutants like PFAS. So we're going to have really smart hydrogeologists model these pollutants for us and come up with a revised protectiveness study. And this is likely going to lead to potential code and standard updates for development projects that want to put UICs in throughout the city. And we're not totally sure what the result of it will be yet. It could change maybe in certain areas where we'll have restrictions on where UICs can be put in and things like that related to the type of development or land use. And risk to the UIC system from spills and things like that. So that's one of the large studies we're working on updating. And then another key impact is that this is going to lead to a lot of increased coordination and data sharing, because everything's going through DEQ online now. So DEQ is kind of making their own database for themselves when they're requesting all this information. So a lot more coordination with them. Does anyone have questions about this section or about development and potential changes for UICs?
I think this study is going to be really important, this update to this report, because as Elizabeth mentioned, the existing report only looked vertically, like how much distance do you need dry between the bottom of a dry well and the groundwater table. And DEQ uses that to also issue private UIC permits on private property. But we don't have the information about what should the horizontal distance be from like a dry well to, say, a drinking water well. And right now the city actually has a very stringent standard where we say you can't build a new dry well within 500 feet of a private well or within the 2-year groundwater travel time of a city municipal well. And the problem is, in most of the city, if you say, well, you can't build a dry well, people say, well, what am I supposed to do with my stormwater? Because there's no pipe to send it to. And, you know, I can't, it's too expensive. I can't pipe it 500 feet away and then it goes into a dry well. And so we want to take a closer look at maybe being more nuanced in that standard, but potentially being more protective adjacent to wells, but maybe finding, like Elizabeth said, maybe it's related to certain land uses or arterial streets where you might have a lot more potential of a truck accident and a spill or something like that. So we're going to try to get a more nuanced approach that actually helps us beef up our standards, because right now it's almost too easy to have to issue people an exception and then they go ahead and build a dry well where our standards say you really shouldn't, because we don't have the information to say, okay, well, if you're this land use, it is okay, or maybe you need an extra pre-treatment method in front of the dry well or something like that. So that's what we're hoping this study will inform, is better standards.
Okay. All right, so those are the 8 main sections that we have in the ice swamp document. And if you guys want to go and review the document, we do have it online.
Or we
Aubrey,
will.
we will have it online. Aubrey, I don't know if you can click that first link to help show them.
But we'll send these slides out as a PDF, so you'll be able to. So if you're, now that you've heard all this and you'll be so interested in reading the whole document and giving us comments, you'll be able to click on this and it'll take you to where the document's going to be placed next week.
Yes. So where it said review document online and you click that link in the slides, it's going to take you to the stormwater program's what's new page. And that's where we're keeping this information for reviewing. So where it says document link will be available soon, we're going to link to the full draft plan right there. And that will most likely be next Monday. On September 11th, we'll have that posted to the website and it'll be there for a month. And then if anyone has comments, they can send them to that email that's listed or to my own email. They both are going to go to me anyways. So either my email or that one, on any comments about the document that you might have or any input. We'd appreciate it very much. And then the final version, we're going to submit to DEQ by November 1st with our annual report.
So this is kind of, it's interesting because it's hard to get people to provide input on a document like this. But it's laying out the roadmap of all of these actions and activities that we're going to take. So it's important to think about it that way. And then also there will be additional opportunities for discussion and comment as we get into the implementation details of some of these tasks, like rewriting standards and codes and things like that.
So you guys will all get an email from us with a reminder and hey, the document's available. Hopefully you were enticed by today, but I guess just we want to take another beat maybe. And any surprises in that content that we walk through? I know we have got a couple of folks who've been involved in the stormwater group for a long time. You've probably seen a few iterations of this work. Anything stand out? There's definitely some overlap with the topics, the density topics and permitting options and other things that we've been talking about along the way. So appreciate the group's input. As Laurie said, all those things are kind of folding into the direction forward.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like you made note of the plan to have more city staff really brought up to speed on this document. So it's not that it was a shelved document every time it was produced in the past, but it was just one other big document of guidance in the city. You've got a real plan to bring people on who are CECL certified, brought on to speed with this initiative. That's really a good implementation. And the reformatting, the representation of the new presentation of it looks really good. I think it'll be good to read through it. It was a dense document passed, and I don't know that you can avoid that necessarily with as much as you have to do for dual permit with DEQ, but I think a lot of efficiencies are going to be built into it. But it all comes down to that implementation, right? What's the usefulness of it? And you've got a good plan moving forward on that to really keep the city accountable and those within the city limits accountable as well.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks for hanging in there, everybody. It's this is really important. It's just man, when you're dealing with regulatory stuff, the way you have to lay it out is
Yeah. I can recommend not reading the whole document in one sitting if you can avoid take it a little one chapter at a time. Maybe it can be a lot to sift through all at once.
Oh my goodness. Elizabeth and I were sitting together yesterday, kind of going through all of it to make sure nothing made us flinch in terms of it being ready to put out for public review. And, you know, the first hour and after that, woo.
And you guys said there's a couple key sections probably for this group, right? Like, I mean, eight might be more than you have appetite for, as just described here, but the construction stuff, there's that middle section. I think it was it 4 and 5?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the
4 and 5.
construction site topics, I think may be of most interest, but you know, there may be others like, you know, the you know, maybe some of the maintenance practices stuff too. So whatever floats your boat.
Right. All right. We've got about 10 minutes left. I was going to do a preview of the next steps here, but maybe just before I go back to that slide, anything else that folks want to say about this process? I mean, we're restarting right now, and we've got a little bit of a light group. I know there's still a lot of vacations and stuff calling folks' attention away from this timeline, but excited just to jump back in, feel like a good pattern these first Wednesdays. I guess anything related to how we're requesting your feedback that we could make it easier for you guys to provide input along the way.
I think this has been useful. This has been good, a good format, and Aubrey, certainly the early heads up on content to review and you know, a week or two to prepare is useful as well. So I think this is good.
Right. Yeah, we can keep those focus question kind of, hey, here's some things we want to ask along the way. And certainly we noticed in putting together that summary document too. I mean, there was a lot of commonality between the, you know, the conservation and the stormwater, and we were trying to balance between the two, but your guys' input was folding into both of those. Austin, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to maybe use this for another plug for the stormwater master plan. And again, thanks for all the efforts that went into this. I think it's such a great, you know, huge first step to really kind of outline the stormwater, you know, desires and efforts that are going to be really taking a big bite out here as we move into the stormwater master plan. And you know, you'll be seeing definitely some additional outlets to provide feedback and input to you know, specifically, you know, a lot of these core, there's so much volume here that Elizabeth just went over. So we're just we'll get our proposals back next week, and that we were really asking for proposers to give their approach to satisfying a lot of these you know, strategies and issues and directions that we want to head. So with that, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. We're going to be really leaning on this group for feedback and input. So I guess just kind of stay tuned in the next, you know, month or two as we really start to, you know, outline that approach. And yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Aubrey, do you want to pull up? There's like the list of upcoming meetings.
Yeah, let me do that. So this is, excuse me, usually in the roadmap at the last page of the agenda that we send out too. But just looking forward, this is, there's a vision beyond into 2024, but here's taking us through the end of 2023. So next month, we are going to have Dan back, and he's going to give some updates and talk a little bit about next steps related to water conservation and the rebate and incentive program. some of the draft tools and templates for right-of-way landscapes. So kind of a little bit of a status update and then collecting some more input with a focus on conservation. And then November, the intent is to have a kind of a half and half meeting. So conservation and stormwater both coming back to the table. This is also, I guess, Lori, one of the things that we want to do here too, so that the last meeting would be an annual review. There's a chance, if you guys are all interested and excited to continue to participate, but we also have this idea of each year checking in and maybe inviting some fresh faces or participants to the group. And so we're going to be kind of collecting your input on staying involved, or if there's another voice at the table that you think is important to carry us forward into 2024, we want to check in on that as we move through these fall meetings as well. And Lori, maybe you want to say something else beyond that, but just as a preview.
Yeah, there's another version of the agenda that kind of also shows the topics for next year as well, just to kind of give a flavor. It relates to what Austin was talking about. I'm trying to find it. Where we made like a bullet list of topics for next year. Yes,
why don't we do this? I know what you're talking about, Lori. We can send that out with our follow-up email too. So folks have that broader vision. We'll make sure that that's part of the communication after the meeting.
Yes, that would be great. Okay.
And we're going to stay on Zoom for a bit, but one of the things, if you did like the idea of doing a few of these in person and you want to plan that in and have a couple more opportunities, maybe not over the holidays necessarily, because it's always tough to schedule, but thinking forward to 2024, if that'd be a good thing to program into this group's conversations. I think it was fun for us, fun for me.
I enjoyed the field trip. It was really fun and informative, and was great to see people in person and see how tall everybody is. And so what we'd put on the list for next year for sure was thinking about another, kind of spring, maybe late spring kind of field trip again. So we could think of because I'm sure there'll be plenty more for us to go. Sometimes it's nice to go kick the tires on things.
I would second that. I think, well, the in-person meetings were great. That was a real nice feature of the group as it met in person on a regular basis. This is just really convenient, of course, but sprinkling in a couple of in-person meetings is good. And then the tours, I think there's a good value also in seasonality. I mean, obviously a summer tour is nicer, or a spring, but there could be, we're tough Central Oregonians. We can put our puffy jackets on and brave some snow. If we get a wet day or rain on snow event, or something, you can't plan that obviously, but we could look at a winter event and consider what's been seen in some of these areas, or maybe if something happens in the winter that the city is aware of and the stormwater team is out there seeing, hey, this is a real big problem we faced, schedule a couple of weeks out, say, hey, heads up, we're going to go to that site and give you some pictures beforehand and show what happened. But I think there's benefit in seeing stormwater facilities throughout the season. And then last note, I'm unfortunately going to miss the next meeting. I will be in Europe with the family. So we'll be tramping around France and Italy for a few weeks coming up here at the end of this month.
That sounds like a good field trip for us all.
Close lookout on stormwater management over there, though.
You can bring back a slideshow, Tom. We'll let you present it.
A slideshow with some camembert cheese or something. Which is not welcome on the overhead bins I found several years back when I brought back some. It's not a good idea to bring back camembert in your checked baggage.
Well, Austin, we should think about that for the master plan. Like maybe there's some particular topics that might lend themselves to a in-person meeting or in-person field trip to go look at. So we'll put our heads together about that.
Great. All right. Well, I think that brings us to a close today then. So you'll hear from us next week. Look for that invite to provide more comments and input on the document. You can send it directly to Elizabeth, or like she said, to that stormwater email. If if you know somebody who'd be interested, share the word. And if not, then we will be back here, same Zoom, same Wednesday next month, and we're going to talk a bit more on water conservation. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Dan has a lot of good stuff to share.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy the day.
Yep.